We're going to talk about adjective clauses. You may also hear them referred to as relative clauses, but I like the word adjective clause because it really helps you to understand the job they do. We know that a clause has a subject and a verb. We know that there are two types of clauses. We have independent clauses that can stand all by themselves, and then we have dependent clauses that must have an independent clause to finish the thought. And dependent clauses always begin with some kind of a dependent word. And this is going to be true in adjective clauses as well. Before we start talking about adjective clauses, though, let's do a quick review. What is an adjective? Well, you know that an adjective always gives us information or describes a noun. And we also know that nouns are found as subjects, objects, or objects of prepositions. So which of these words are adjectives? Well, a good way to identify whether a word is an adjective or not is to use this little pattern. If you can put the word here and it makes sense, then you have an adjective. Can we have an unkind man? Yeah, sure, it's an adjective. Can we have a fast man? Absolutely, another adjective. How about a value man? No, not an adjective. A careless man? Yes. How about a silently man? No, not an adjective. Can we have an old man? Absolutely. So that's a good way to test to see if a word is an adjective. So let's go on and talk about adjective clauses. So what is an adjective clause? Well, an adjective clause is a type of dependent clause beginning with a dependent word, a subject and a verb that is going to describe a noun. And adjective clauses actually take two sentences about the same noun and combine them into one sentence. So let's take a look. I want to start actually here with the sentence that has the adjective clause. The postcard, which I bought, shows a beautiful vista of the Grecian coastline. Which I bought is the adjective clause here. It begins with a dependent word, which. It has a subject, I, and it has a verb, bought. So it's a dependent clause. Now, this clause is telling us about what noun? Postcard. The postcard. What postcard? The postcard, which I bought, shows a beautiful vista of the Grecian coastline. Now, basically, this sentence is a combination of these two sentences above. The postcard shows a beautiful vista of the Grecian coastline, and I bought the postcard. You'll see postcard is used twice here, and what we've done is replaced the second postcard with the relative pronoun which, because we don't want to say the postcard I bought, so we say the postcard which I bought. All right, let's go on. Now, these relative pronouns are words like who, that, which, that, and whose. And there are some that we use when we're talking about subject position in the adjective clause. And these relative pronouns are those dependent words at the beginning of the adjective clause. And so the relative pronoun is the word that is going to be used instead of the noun that is the same in the two sentences that we're combining. So when we're talking about people, the subject relative pronouns are who and that. If we're talking about things or animals, which or that. And possessive, whose. Possessive meaning something or someone belongs to someone else or something else. So let's look closer at subject relative pronouns. So we're going to use these subject relative pronouns to create dependent clauses. We're going to take the relative pronoun and use it to replace the word that is in common or the same between the two sentences. And often the relative pronoun is going to be the subject of the dependent clause. All right, so let's look at that. Route 66 is a long road. This road goes from Chicago to California. So we have a noun, road, in common or the same, and we are going to replace one of those with one of the subject relative pronouns. Road is a thing, so we are going to use the relative pronoun that. Route 66 is a long road that goes from Chicago to California. In this sentence, that is actually the subject of this dependent adjective clause. Now we know it's an adjective clause because that goes from Chicago to California is telling us about the noun road. Now we can also have object relative pronouns because sometimes the relative pronoun is going to replace the object in the dependent clause, or it may be the object of a preposition. So let's take a look at what that might look like. If we had these two sentences, I gave her flowers. The flowers were expensive. If we want to put them together using a dependent adjective clause, it would look like this. The flowers that I gave her were expensive. That I gave her is the adjective clause describing the noun flowers. And we're using that because flowers are a thing. Now you'll notice the two sentences we combined, we're talking about flowers I gave her, and that is the object in this sentence. So we are going to use the object relative pronoun. We're talking about a thing, that. And if it's people, we use whom, who, or that, and also the possessive whose. Now, I want you to notice something here. You'll know that you have an object relative pronoun because after the relative pronoun, you will have another subject and a verb. So that isn't functioning as the subject in this adjective clause. It's functioning as actually the object. Because look, here I already have a subject. So I gave her that. The flowers would be the object. So anytime you have an object relative pronoun, you know because you have the relative pronoun, a subject, and a verb. Okay, now remember the relative pronoun replaces the noun, so you don't want to use the relative pronoun and the noun in the dependent clause. So we would never say, the postcard which I bought, the postcard is pretty. No, because which is actually replacing the noun that is in common. The postcard which I bought is pretty. And be careful, the relative pronoun must be next to the word it describes, the noun it's telling us more information about. So, the sharks opened their mouths while they swam by the boat which were full of sharp teeth. So here it sounds like this adjective clause, were full of sharp teeth, is talking about the boat. And that doesn't make sense. Because what's full of sharp teeth? The shark's mouth. So it should look like this. The sharks opened their mouths, which were full of sharp teeth. Now the adjective clause is right next to the noun that it is giving us information about and describing. Now in formal written English, academic English, adjective clauses that have object relative pronouns for people use whom. And I know it sounds very formal, and it is. And in adjective clauses with an object of a preposition, we have to move that preposition forward and we use whom or which. So that looks like this. Jack London, whom I admire, wrote a lot of short stories. Basically here we're saying I admire Jack London. Jack London is an object, so we are using the object relative pronoun whom. We know it's an object relative pronoun because we still have the subject I here. And it's formal. Now, the next one. The presidency is the position to which many politicians aspire. Here we have the relative pronoun functioning as the object of the preposition. All right. Now you have to know whether or not the dependent clause or the adjective clause is giving us essential, absolutely important information, or it's just extra information about the noun. And this can change the meaning and the punctuation. So essential clauses are also called identifying or restrictive. Identifying means we absolutely have to have that information to know which noun we are talking about. So if we have information that we cannot remove because we need it to know which one we're talking about, we cannot use commas. Because if we have commas, that means it can be taken out. Now, if it is non-identifying or non-restrictive information in the adjective clause, we have to use commas, and we cannot use the relative pronoun that. So let's see if we can understand the difference between these two sentences. My sister, comma, who lives in Bel Air, comma, has 3 children. My sister who lives in Bel Air has 3 children. Now, if we know that this adjective clause, because it is separated by commas, can be removed, then we don't need that information to identify the sister. It's just extra information. But in the second sentence, we can't take this information that the adjective clause supplies out. We need it to identify the sister. My sister who lives in Bel Air has 3 children. So in which sentence is it clear that I have more than one sister? Well, if we cannot remove the adjective clause information in the second sentence, that means I needed to know which sister I'm talking about. So that means I must have more than one sister if I have to identify her by leaving in this essential adjective clause. Now how about these two sentences? He looked in the refrigerator and he threw away the food which was rotten. He looked in the refrigerator and he threw away the food, comma, which was rotten. So we have adjective clauses here, and we have a comma on this one, meaning it's not identifying information. So which sentence means that all of the food in the refrigerator was rotten? He looked in the refrigerator and he threw away the food. He looked in the refrigerator and he threw away the food which was rotten. Well, if we have to have this adjective clause because we have no comma, then it is needed to identify exactly which food was thrown out. But when we have the comma and we can remove the adjective clause, then we know we don't need it, which means he threw away all the food. He looked in the refrigerator and he threw away the food. Okay, so now you have a little more information about adjective and identifying versus non-identifying. So you just have to think about if a listener or a reader would be able to identify the noun without the adjective clause. He is the man who works at the grocery store. Who works at the grocery store? There's no comma. We need this information to know which man we're talking about. Okay, that's a good beginning on adjective clauses. We'll get some more practice in the next part.